a day where there is no shade but the shade of Allah. So first, I'm going to probably put you guys on the spot. Does anyone know the first one? Or just shoot them out randomly. Let's see. I'll go first. A just ruler. So a just ruler. Second?
Two people that love themselves for the sake of Allah.
Perfect. Two people who love each other for the sake of Allah. They meet at it and they depart at it. Number 3. Anyone know? So I'll run through them for you guys, right? Number 1 is a just ruler. Number 2 is a youth who grew up with the worship of Allah. Number 3 is a person whose heart is attached to the masjid. Number 4 is 2 persons who love and meet each other and depart from each other for the sake of Allah. Number 5 is a man whom a beautiful woman of high rank seduces him, and he rejects this offer by saying, I fear Allah. And number 6 is a person who gives charity and conceals it to such an extent that the right hand does not know that the left hand, or what the left hand has given. And the last one is number 7, a person who remembers Allah in privacy and sheds tears. A person who remembers Allah in private and weeps. So when it comes to this part of the hadith, we're going to focus first on remembering Allah. We're going to remember first the virtues of making adhkar and dhikr. So first and foremost, the remembrance of Allah is something that's extremely important in our religion, due to the fact that remembering Allah is not only just making adhkar, it's making dua, it's praying salah, and all of these things are part of remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in these actions, there's virtues as well. We have one ayah in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَاذْكُرُونِي أَذْكُرْكُمْ وَاشْكُرُونِي وَلَا تَكْفُرُونَ. Right? Remember me and I will remember you, and thank me and never be ungrateful. So Allah says, remember me and I will remember you. What better than to be remembered by Allah? Right? And we turn to Allah for whatever it is that we want. We turn to Allah for whatever we ask for. So that in and of itself is one virtue. At the same time, the Quran says, الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَتَطْمَئِنُّ قُلُوبُهُم بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. The ayah goes, أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبُ. Right? أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبُ. Verily in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find ease. So this is a few things, or goes to show you again, us especially as people that live in this country, certain things, certain things they leave a void in our hearts, or we feel like we have everything but we're missing something. Look at how your connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. And that establishing of a connection isn't only just salah, salah, salah. There's other ways to do it as well. Listening to Quran, reading Quran, making adhkar. And these things, these actions that, such as adhkar and Quran, you can do them while you're walking. They're not secluded to a specific time, right? Whereas with prayer, you have to pray certain prayers within a certain time. You can make extra prayers as well. But let's say I'm walking down, or I'm going to college, or whatever, I'm going to work, whatever it is, I can't just stop and pray 2 rak'ahs, right? You technically could, but speaking in the matter, you're walking. So you can listen to Quran, you can make dhikr, you can say subhanallah, alhamdulillah, or whatever it is. You can do all of these things while you are going about your day. Plain and simple, right? It's not complicated, and it's an action that is rewarding, and an action that is very simple. And even more than that, the ayah does not say to remember Allah in a specific manner. It doesn't say to remember Allah in making dhikr. It doesn't say to remember Allah in, your salah. It says, or the ayah goes, فَاذْكُرُونِي أَذْكُرْكُمْ. Remembering Allah in general. فَاذْكُرُونِي أَذْكُرْكُمْ وَاشْكُرُونِي وَلَا تَكْفُرُونَ. Right? And thank me and never be ungrateful. And even in that element of being thankful to Allah, rewards you even more. So virtues of remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Abu Hurairah reported that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, I am near to the thought of my servant as he thinks about me, and I am with him as he remembers me. And if he remembers me in his heart, I also remember him in my heart. Again, this is metaphorically speaking. And if he remembers me in a manner, this is befitting of Allah. And if he remembers me in assembly, I remember him in assembly, better than his remembrance. And if he draws near me by the span of a palm, I draw near him by the cubit. Meaning if someone gets close to Allah by a handspan, Allah gets close to him by a cubit, meaning even closer than the person came to Allah. And if he draws near me by a cubit, I draw near him by the space covered by 2 hands. And if he walks towards me, I rush towards him. If he walks towards me, I rush towards him. So whatever initiative you make in remembering Allah, Allah will match that initiative and go even more with it. Allah will match that initiative and go even more with it. So this is the beauty of remembering. And also, the assembly that Allah mentions that He remembers you in is not the assembly like we have over here where people gather. For example, we have this sadaqah. An assembly in which Allah mentions you is that assembly of the people of, or rather the angels, right? An assembly that's greater than you can ever imagine. So this is why it's important to remember Allah. It comes with a lot of virtue in and of itself. At the same time, whatever initiative you put in, Allah will do even more than that. We know the hadith, and again this is in a different circumstance, in a different scenario, that mentions, you're putting your trust in Allah entirely, you can, and then leaving the rest on Allah. So whatever it is that you do, remembering Allah, making istighfar, right? And I talked about this today in Jum'ah too, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, قُلْ يَا عِبَادِيَ الَّذِينَ أَسْرِفُوا عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ لَا تَقْنَطُوا مِنْ رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ. Do not despair of the mercy of Allah. Right? Do not despair of the mercy of Allah. Now the stipulation being that, of course, you try your best to stay away from sin, do whatever it is you can to stay on the right path, not do that which is not allowed. And then after that, whatever slipping up you have, or whatever shortcomings you have, Allah takes care of it from the rest, and you have the intent to actually stop it. Right? Same thing over here. If you remember Allah, Allah remembers you. You turn to Allah, Allah turns to you. You remember Allah, you walk towards Allah, Allah runs to you, plain and simple. So whatever initiative it is that you take for Allah, Allah will match it and then surpass it as well. When it comes to remembering Allah in private, and when it comes to this category of the hadith, so now we're transitioning more into the hadith that mentions that specific part of the one who remembers Allah in private and weeps. There's one essential thing when it comes to this hadith, one essential thing, and that's about intention. Now we're going to talk about that later on, but inshallah we're going to mention over here as well rather. So Ibn Hajar, the scholar, comments on the last person who weeps under the shade of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by saying, the first thing is a man who remembers Allah. Now this remembrance of Allah can either be in his heart or it can be mentioned out loud. Now this isn't specific to one or the other. Both of these will come into that remembrance of Allah, right? Because for example, if you're in private, you could be reading Quran out loud, right? Or at the same time, you could just be in your bed, remembering Allah, thinking about what you've done or the blessings Allah has given you, and that kind of strikes something in your heart that makes you weep, right? So this remembrance of Allah is not secluded or not specific to one thing. It is both remembering Allah out loud or within your heart. So this is one thing. Secondly, the hadith mentions when he is alone. I actually will save this for later on. The third thing is his eyes fill up, means that they fill up with tears, and this is another metaphor. So the third thing is about being alone, and this thing, wallahi, subhanAllah, they mentioned, or they actually asked me to speak about this, but this is one thing that I mention every single lecture, I mention every single khutbah, I mention every single opportunity that I get, and that's intention. The reason why it's specific to remembering Allah in private, because what happens? If I'm, for example, around people, I might start, some people, may Allah forgive them, are reminded to myself before reminded to anyone else. Maybe they pray in front of people, they make the sujood longer, they fill up their eyes with tears, they put on a whole Oscar award-winning show, Why? Because I want to impress people, I've done this, I've done that, I'm this, I'm that, look how righteous I am, I'm crying, I'm standing in front of Allah. Because there's people around them. And again, this happens sometimes unintentionally as well. It's not always intentional. Sometimes the waswas of shaitan gets to you and you start thinking about, there's people around me, let me make my sujood a little longer, let me make my ruku a little longer, let me read a little bit out loud, read some Baqarah so they know I know some Quran. Whatever the case is, we start doing these things, we don't realize that we're kind of skewing our intent. So there's the factor of people being around you, whether it's a family member, whether it's a friend, whether it's a sheikh, whether it's this, whether it's that, whatever it is. But when it comes to remembering Allah in private, that factor is not there. And factors in regards to impressing people or showing off the riyah, when it comes to being private, they're not present, right? There's hopefully, I hope there's no security cameras in your room, you're being watched by someone, right? Or you have someone sneaking inside your window. No, you're alone, you're in your room, you're in your bed, whatever the case is, and you're remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, plain and simple, right? So the factor of showing off, for the most part, again, you never know people, they put up their phones over here and they record themselves praying salah. May Allah forgive them, but point of the matter is that for the most part, and again, that wouldn't be private now, right? But for the most part, when it comes to being alone, when it comes to being in private, which the hadith specifies, there is an increased amount of sincerity. And the factor of showing off is taken away. So that is indicative of the fact that those tears that come out from the person's eyes are what? Those tears that come out from the person's eyes are sincere. There's no one to impress, there's no one to show off to, there's no one to brag to about, there's no one to impress, nothing. They're in their room, or they're in private, whether it's in a car, masjid, whatever the case is, they're in private, and they're remembering Allah. The factors of showing off are not present. So those tears that person weeps, for the most part, Allah knows the individual's intent, but for the most part, those tears most likely will be sincere. Those tears will be sincere. So him remembering Allah and him weeping at the thought of Allah, he or she, whatever, you guys get the point, right? So remembering Allah, it's going to be sincere. And this one factor of sincerity is the make it or break it. I'm sure you guys have heard the hadith numerous times when it comes to the people who go into Jahannam first. And I think I've mentioned it numerous times over here before. It's going to be someone, or it's going to be Muslims. Does anyone know the hadith? The first person is who? You can just randomly say the three.
Scholar.
Okay, close, I'll fix it, but scholar, someone who has knowledge, or has knowledge. Second?
Reciter of the Quran.
Someone who gains knowledge of the Quran. So the hadith mentions specifically Quran, right? Secondly, or someone who obtains knowledge. Secondly, is who?
Martyr.
Perfect. Someone who is a martyr, a shaheed. And number three?
Philanthropist.
Perfect. A philanthropist, right? Someone who gives or donates money for the sake of Allah. And I air quotes when I say sake of Allah. All three, just to paraphrase the hadith and kind of zoom through it, all three of these people will be brought forth on Yawm al-Qiyamah. And what will happen? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ask these people, why did you do these actions? And they'll say, oh, I did them to, for your sake, Ya Allah. And Allah on Yawm al-Qiyamah will tell them, liar, you did this so people can say, look, mashallah, he does, he reads Quran beautifully, or he does this, he gives so much money in charity, or he died a shaheed, look, he's so courageous, right? And respectively, each characteristic is for the individual who does the action. And then after that, what happens? The actions are taken, thrown on their face, because it's a sign of disrespect, attacking the face, and they're dragged on their, the actions are thrown on them, and they're dragged on their faces into Jahannam. Now, if the person who did that action corrected their intention, it would have been an action that could have led them to Jannah. Make sense? It could have been an action that led them to Jannah. Now, I'll ask you guys, intent, is this something tangible? Can I see an individual's intent? In order for you to change your intent, do you have to work out, run around the block, do this, do that? No. It's something that's inside your heart. So a change of intent is something that's not even tangible. It's something so simple, but yet it's one of the biggest, if not the biggest, deciding factors when it comes to your action. An action that has bad intent, an action that has intent that is to impress, that is to show off, is harmful to you rather than being beneficial. At the same time, an action that has correct intent, even if it has its shortcomings, what happens? That action is beneficial for you because you did it for the sake of Allah. Am I going to reward you? No. I can't reward myself, right? Allah's going to reward you. Doing an action for Allah is where you're going to actually see a benefit and a reward in that action. Same thing when it comes to calamity befalling. So we've spoken about the importance of adhkar, the importance of remembering Allah. This is a gateway to blessings. This is a gateway to obtaining the blessings of Allah, the mercy of Allah, and ultimately whatever it is that you want, whether it's forgiveness or something, even if it's materialistic, you have to ask Allah for it, right? And you'll get your success or whatever it is that you want when you remember Allah. That's number one. Number two, when you walk towards Allah, Allah runs towards you. Now this is a manner that's befitting of Him. This isn't a metaphorical running. But the point is that when you make an initiative to reach out to Allah, to establish a connection with Allah, Allah sets things in place for you. Right? When someone actually wants to go out and seek knowledge or do something correct, Allah will establish it for them. But if someone goes out to impress people or to do this, that, and the third, Allah won't do it for them. Again, Allah is the one that decides what to do. But point I'm mentioning is that when you make the initiative for the sake of Allah, sincerely, you will find benefit in it and you'll find ease in whatever it is that you are trying to do. That's number two. Number three, whatever it is that you want comes by remembering Allah. And remembering Allah is not only salah, sujood. It comes in form of remembering Allah and